Hi, welcome to Crime Clueless. We're your hosts. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Lara.
I'm Krista.
And I'm Kayla.
I have a solved case for you guys today.
Yay.
Ooh, I know that
Your favorite.
the unsolved ones leave us with so many questions, and I like seeing one where they did the detective work eventually.
Okay.
And we got we do have a conviction. So
I feel like lately some of the solved ones too just are leaving us with all these questions.
yeah,
But
I don't think this one will.
okay,
I think you'll like it.
thank you. We appreciate that.
I know you like all my cases, but
We do.
you'll like the conclusiveness.
We like,
Yes.
we like it tied up in a bow.
A little bit, yeah. And we like justice for
Yes.
these victims,
Yes,
right?
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah. All right, let's dive in. Imagine marrying the love of your life, building your dream career, and settling into the promise of a bright future, only for it all to be violently stolen away. That's what happened to Sherri Rasmussen, a brilliant nurse who had everything to live for. Her murder in 1986 was initially deemed a random burglary gone wrong, but decades later, a stunning twist revealed the killer hiding in plain sight. Someone maybe who had sworn to uphold the law. This is a story of love, jealousy, betrayal, and murder. How did the truth remain buried for so long? Today, we unravel the chilling case of Sherri Rasmussen. She was the kind of person anyone would admire. At just 29 years old, she was a trailblazer serving as nursing director at a major medical center. She was smart, compassionate, and loved by everyone who knew her. In the fall of 1985, she married John Rutan, the man she thought she'd spend the rest of her life with. Their love story was picture perfect, their future full of promise. But in February of 1986, everything shattered. Sherri was found murdered in her Los Angeles home, beaten, shot, and left for dead. The police were quick to label it a botched robbery. Something about the case just didn't sit right with Sherri's family. For over 20 years, they pushed for answers, refusing to believe their daughter's death was the result of random violence. What followed was a winding, decades-long journey to uncover the truth, one that revealed a sinister connection between Sherri's murder and someone with a badge. How does a rising star like Sherri become the target of such violence? And how could justice take over 2 decades to catch up to her killer? Today, we're diving deep into the murder of Sherri Rasmussen, a case that shook the LAPD to its core and became one of the most chilling examples of how jealousy, obsession, and betrayal can lead to devastating consequences. Before Sherri became a promising young nurse, she was simply a bright, driven, and compassionate girl growing up in Southern California. Born on February 7th, 1957, Sherri was the youngest of 3 daughters in a close-knit family. Her parents, Nels and Loretta Rasmussen, described her as a natural leader from a young age, someone who excelled academically and cared deeply for others. Sherri's intelligence was evident early on. She was a standout student, graduating high school at just 16 years old. But Sherri wasn't content with simply being good. She wanted to make a real impact. She pursued a nursing degree and quickly rose to prominence in her field. She earned a master's degree in nursing by her mid-20s. Her career trajectory was meteoric. By 29, Sherri was the director of critical care nursing at Glendale Adventist Medical Center, where she managed a large team and pioneered new patient care protocols. Her colleagues admired her professionalism and her continued and genuine desire to make a difference in people's lives. But Sherri wasn't just her accomplishments. She was vibrant, she was caring, she had a great sense of humor. Friends and family often spoke about her warmth and how she had a way of making everyone feel at ease. Despite her busy career, she made time for the people she loved, including her parents and her sisters. She was the kind of person who seemed to have it all: a fulfilling career, a supportive family, and soon a man who would sweep her off her feet. In 1985, Sherri met John, a UCLA graduate and an engineer. Their romance blossomed quickly, and by November of that year, they were married. Sherri's parents later recalled how happy she seemed during this time, how it felt like everything in her life was falling into place. Sherri and John's love story began, like many others, through a chance encounter that quickly turned into something more. John, having recently graduated, was instantly drawn to Sherri's intelligence, her confidence, and her radiant smile. She had a magnetic presence, the kind of person who made everyone around her feel valued. To John, she was unlike anyone he'd ever met. Their relationship moved quickly but naturally, fueled by shared common connection and mutual admiration. Sherri's dedication to her career and John's passion for fitness and engineering may have seemed like maybe worlds apart, but their differences complemented each other. While Sherri brought a sense of grounded ambition, John added spontaneous adventure to their dynamic. They enjoyed spending time together, exploring the city, and making plans for the future, filled with travel, laughter, and love. By late 1985, their relationship had become serious, and John knew he wanted to spend the rest of his life with Sherri. They tied the knot in a beautiful ceremony in November, surrounded by family and friends who expressed that they were thrilled to see Sherri so happy. Sherri's father, Nels, described how she seemed to be on top of the world during this time. Her career was thriving, her marriage was off to a promising start, and she was finally taking some well-deserved time to focus on herself and her new role as a wife. As newlyweds, Sherri and John settled into their life together, sharing a condo in a quiet Los Angeles neighborhood. Like any other couple, they had challenges. Sherri was adjusting to balancing her career with married life. Also, John often traveled for work, but those who knew them said they appeared to be a happy, loving couple that were building the foundation for what they believed would be a lifetime together. February 24th, 1986 began like any other Monday for Sherri and John. John left for work early that morning while Sherri, exhausted from her demanding schedule, decided to stay home. She had told John she wasn't feeling well and planned to spend the day resting and catching up on some tasks around the condo. It was, for Sherri, a rare moment of downtime and a chance to recharge. John later recalled how ordinary the morning seemed, unaware that it would be the last time he would see his wife alive.
Oh, it's sad.
Mm-hmm.
I always hate that. You see.
Like you just never know.
So sad.
Yeah, it always gives me chills.
Well, it's crazy just how quick life can change.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what this case demonstrates, I think. Sometime between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m., a neighbor heard what sounded like a heated argument coming from Sherri and John's condo. The voices, the neighbor described one female, one male, were loud enough to stand out, but the neighbor didn't think too much of it at the time. Later, they would wonder if that was the moment that Sherri's life slipped away. When John stepped into the condo he shared with Sherri that evening, he immediately sensed something was wrong. The usually tidy space was in chaos. Chairs were overturned, a lamp was broken, and shards of glass from a shattered vase were scattered across the living room floor. The air was heavy with an unnatural stillness, broken only by the faint hum of appliances in the background. It didn't take long for John to find Sherri. She was lying on her back near the living room couch. She had been beaten, and she was lifeless. Blood pooled around her and stained the surrounding carpet, telling a horrifying story of the violence she had endured. Her face and upper body bore the unmistakable signs of a brutal struggle. She had bruises and defensive wounds that suggested she fought desperately for her life. A large bite mark on her arm was particularly shocking, a bizarre and deeply personal act that would later become a crucial piece of evidence. Sherri had been shot 3 times in the chest at close range, likely with a .38 caliber revolver. The bullets left small, charred holes in her shirt, a heartbreaking reminder of the cold and calculated way her killer ended her life. Strangely, a quilt had been draped over her torso, almost as if to conceal the violence beneath it. Some investigators would later speculate that this act pointed to a killer who felt maybe a twisted sense of remorse, or perhaps being familiar with their victim. The rest of the condo painted a puzzling picture. The front door showed signs of forced entry, but the scene inside was inconsistent with a typical burglary. Valuables, including Sherri's jewelry and even her purse, remained untouched. The only item notably missing was her BMW, which was later recovered abandoned in a different part of Los Angeles. Police also found a broken ceramic vase, which appeared to have been used as a weapon during the struggle. Its shards were scattered across the room, further evidence of how fiercely Sherri had fought to survive. Amid the chaos, detectives found other clues that raised more questions than answers. The bite mark, deeply personal, and detectives theorized that it was possibly a vengeful motive. A bloody fingerprint was discovered on a nearby piece of furniture, but we did not have advanced DNA testing in 1986, and this evidence couldn't yet lead investigators to a suspect. Despite the brutality of the crime, there were no witnesses, no clear suspects, and no murder weapon. For the detectives, it felt like a dead end. For Sherri's family, however, it was the beginning of their decades-long fight to ensure her story was never forgotten and that her killer would not remain free forever.
Sorry, what year was this again?
1986.
Okay.
From the moment detectives arrived at the crime scene, the investigation into Sherri's murder seemed to take an unfortunate turn. Despite the evident brutality of the crime, the initial theory was that Sherri had been killed in a botched burglary. The forced entry on the door and just the disarray of the condo seemed to support this conclusion. However, like we talked about, there were significant details that did not align with this theory.
Yeah, if they didn't even go through her purse, it doesn't seem like a burglary, or try and find any jewelry or anything.
Right.
That just doesn't really seem like a burglary.
And the bite mark too. Why would you
Yeah.
do that to some random person you're just trying to rob? I don't know. That seems weird too.
Well, do they happen to know if that occurred pre or post-mortem?
Before she died.
Okay.
I mean, if she had her hand up in his face, trying to
yeah,
keep him
yeah.
away,
Mhm.
and they bite her arm.
I guess that makes
That's what I
sense.
was-
Yeah.
That's what I was picturing.
That could make
Yeah.
sense too. Yeah.
I think that's what detectives decided to go with. That's not it, though.
Oh. Okay.
The level of violence, like we just talked about, that was inflicted just doesn't line up with a random botched burglary either. It was far more personal than what they would expect. The police were, though, firm in their belief that Sherri had interrupted a thief and tragically paid the price. Sherri's family, particularly her father, Nels, was quick to voice his doubts. Nels repeatedly told investigators about a former girlfriend of John. He shared that she had confronted Sherri before the wedding and expressed anger over John moving on. To Nels, it was clear that this was a jealous ex who hadn't been able to let go. He believed that she needed to be investigated. Despite his insistence, her name is barely mentioned in the early case files, and her connection to the murder seemingly ignored. Instead, investigators focused on their burglary theory and maybe potential gang involvement. The stolen BMW was found in a neighborhood known for car thefts. However, no concrete evidence emerged to support this line of inquiry either. With no witnesses, no murder weapon, and no immediate suspects, the case quickly lost momentum. Within weeks, it became another cold case in the LAPD's files.
Did they say why they never followed up with the jealous ex-girlfriend?
They never followed up with the jealous ex-girlfriend because she worked for the LAPD.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah. For Sherri's family, her death was more than just a devastating loss. It was an open wound that refused to heal. Nels, Sherri's father, was particularly vocal in his determination to find answers from the very beginning. He had felt that the police were too quick to dismiss critical leads, especially regarding the ex-girlfriend. He had shared his suspicions repeatedly, even naming her outright in early conversations with investigators. His concerns fell on deaf ears. He was fortunately not a man to give up easy. After losing his youngest daughter, Sherri, in such a brutal and senseless way, he felt that it was his responsibility to fight for her, even when it seemed no one else would. Early on, Nels and his wife, Loretta, tried to work with the LAPD in good faith, trusting that the detectives would leave no stone unturned. But as time went on, it became painfully clear that Sherri's case wasn't being given the attention it deserved. Nels vividly recalled his first meeting with the investigators assigned to the case. He came prepared, bringing up the ex-girlfriend by name, recounting stories Sherri had shared about her. There was the time that she had shown up to Sherri and John's condo unannounced, wearing her LAPD uniform, and refused to leave. Then there was the moment she confronted Sherri at her workplace, warning her to stay away from John. To Nels, these repeated incidents, painted a clear picture of a woman who was deeply fixated on his son-in-law and unwilling to let go of the past. But the detectives dismissed Nels' concerns. They reassured him their theory they had, it made the most sense, and they suggested that he was, get this, overreacting.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yep.
your grieving father
Overreacting.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
He's just lost his daughter.
Yeah. Isn't that horrible?
And
Yes.
then in the one of the other cases we discussed, Pam, they thought he was a suspect because he was overreacting.
I mean,
can nobody have the correct reaction to their loved one dying?
exactly. 100%. Every time. Not every time, but so often. And it's always one way or the other. You know,
Yeah.
even with like Betty, like Alan didn't react enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Nels, heartbroken, but so determined, continued to push. Over the years, he would sit in countless meetings with the LAPD only to be met with polite but firm resistance. He often left feeling like the police weren't just ignoring him, they were actively avoiding the uncomfortable questions he was asking. Loretta, Sherri's mother, was quieter but just as determined. She would write letters to the LAPD, pouring out her grief and her desire for justice. In one letter, she described the joy Sherri had brought into their lives and the pain of knowing her daughter's killer was still out there living freely. "How can you close the door on this?" she asked. "Sherri deserves more." The family's frustration didn't stop at the police department. Nels also reached out to journalists, hoping to draw public attention to the case. He shared files, letters, and even his own theories with anyone who would listen. But for years, it felt like he was just shouting into the void. Loretta later reflected on this time, saying, "We felt like we were the only ones who cared. But we
That would
couldn't
be
stop."
so hard. I'm sorry.
Right? I know. I can't imagine having that horrible, devastating loss and no one is going to spend time on it.
Yeah.
So sad. That'd be so hard.
Yeah.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Especially when there's a lead right there.
Yes.
A big,
You're just going to close as a
highlighted
cold case. Yeah.
lead. Yes, that they refused to look into. Nels would later say that he often found himself sitting alone at the dining room table late into the night, poring over old photographs and police reports. One of his favorite pictures was of Sherri as a young girl beaming with pride as she held up a certificate from school. She was always an achiever, he would say. She worked so hard for everything she had, and she always did it with kindness. Nels kept a photo on his desk as a constant reminder of the daughter he was fighting for. Loretta, too, found solace in memories of Sherri's vibrant personality. She often shared stories with friends and family about how Sherri loved to bake cookies during the holidays, filling their home with warmth and the smell of cinnamon. She had this way of making people feel special, Loretta would say, her voice catching. She didn't just give you a gift, she made it meaningful, something that showed how well she knew you. Even after her death, her sisters would gather with Nels and Loretta on holidays, sharing stories about Sherri's sense of humor. One year, Loretta recalled, Sherri had dressed up as a character from a movie for Halloween and convinced the entire family to join her. She was the ringleader, Loretta said with a small laugh. She always knew how to have fun. Loretta also shared how Sherri would come home late from her shifts, exhausted but glowing with pride after helping a patient. One evening, she told Loretta about a particularly difficult case she had with a critically ill child. Sherri had spent hours comforting the family and advocating for better care. She didn't just do her job, Loretta said. She made people feel seen, like they mattered. That's who she was. These memories, both joyful and bittersweet, were what fueled the family's determination. For Nels, Loretta, Sherri's sisters, keeping her story alive wasn't just about justice, it was about preserving the legacy of a remarkable woman whose life was stolen far too soon. Nels once said, "If we don't fight for Sherri, who will?" By 2009,
20 years later.
More than that.
Yeah.
23?
23. By 2009, 23 years later, her murder had been a cold case basically the entire time.
Wow.
However, advances in forensic technology and a fresh set of eyes on the evidence would finally breathe life into the investigation, largely thanks to the persistence of Sherri's family and then the dedication of cold case detectives who actually refused to let her story fade away, unlike in 1986.
Good for them.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Was her husband involved in this too? You haven't really mentioned him.
I was literally thinking that you were just going to ask that because there's not a lot in here about him pushing or...
Interesting.
Yeah. And I also didn't really find anything about them looking into him as a suspect, which, I mean, if they're just saying a burglary gone wrong, but then they're saying it's not a burglary, I'm surprised, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There just hasn't been much mention of him at all.
And I was trying to decide if it was because they'd only been married for 3 months. They'd only known each other for a year, but still, you're building your life together. You're planning to be together forever.
Yeah.
Maybe her parents were just more vocal about looking into stuff. So that's like what's recorded, but
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
that could be. I might have to look into that a little more too. Okay, so John, he was not considered as a suspect just because the LAPD so quickly decided that it was the burglary gone wrong. He was at work when the murder occurred and there wasn't any evidence tying him to the crime, but it doesn't seem like police looked into his alibi really at all or anything. And he eventually left Los Angeles, remarried, and started a new life. When detectives reopened the case in the 2000s, he did fully cooperate and provided information about the relationship with the ex-girlfriend. And he also allowed police to get DNA. When he learned that it maybe was his ex-girlfriend, he was shocked, but he had moved on.
It had been about 20 years.
And he did believe the police's theory, so he wasn't really pushing at the time for more.
Interesting.
Yeah. That's a great question because you hear her parents really pushing and he's not listed alongside them. The breakthrough in the case came when detectives re-examined key evidence from the crime scene, particularly the bite mark on Sherri's arm. In 1986, DNA testing couldn't do anything for that, but in 2009, it had become a powerful tool in solving cold cases. They were able to extract DNA from the bite mark and tested it against the databases. Their results pointed to a startling revelation. The DNA belonged to a woman.
Surprise.
Surprise. This was a significant development as it directly contradicted the original burglary theory and forced investigators to revisit other leads. With the new DNA evidence in hand, detectives began combing through old case files, looking for any potential female suspect. Because they have no idea who it could be.
Oh, goodness.
Eventually, the name Stephanie Lazarus surfaced. She was an LAPD detective. She was mentioned very briefly in the original investigation due to her past relationship with John and her documented confrontations with Sherri. However, her name had been largely dismissed at the time. Quickly, she had gone on to build a successful career within the LAPD. To her colleagues, Lazarus was a respected detective. She was dedicated, intelligent, and seemingly above reproach. Detectives handling the cold case decided to investigate Lazarus discreetly, Given her position within the LAPD, they knew any misstep could jeopardize the case. They began gathering evidence quietly, building a profile on Lazarus and her possible connection to the murder. They uncovered reports of her obsessive behavior towards John, including uninvited visits to his home and his workplace after their breakup. They also reviewed the original testimony of Nels, who had identified her as a potential suspect back in 1986.
Oh, if only they would have just followed up on it. Just a
so
little
frustrating.
bit. Yes.
It's
For 20 years to know, basically, this is probably the person who did it.
Yeah.
And to get zero answers, zero justice. And then 20 years later, I mean, that's got to be a sense of relief at that point, but that has to be so frustrating.
to feel like you're yelling into the void.
Yes.
For 20 years.
Yes.
Horrible. To confirm their suspicions, investigators needed a fresh DNA sample from Stephanie. They followed her carefully and eventually obtained a discarded item. Reports indicate that it was a cup or a utensil containing her saliva. When the sample was tested, it was a match to the DNA from the bite mark on Sherri's arm.
So they had collected, like swabbed the bite mark and just saved it. Well,
Yeah.
it's good that they did that.
I'm actually stunned that they did.
Yeah.
Because it just feels like if they're not going to follow the lead, maybe they already have a suspicion she's involved, but don't want to follow it. I don't know.
It's like she's their friend.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I am glad that they stored it correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they could have destroyed it on accident.
After 23 long years, the mystery of who had killed Sherri was finally solved. On June 5th, 2009, Stephanie arrived at LAPD headquarters in downtown Los Angeles, completely unaware that the walls were closing in around her. She was a veteran detective specializing in art theft. She had built a reputation as a hardworking and dependable officer. She had spent over 2 decades with the LAPD, rising through the ranks and earning the respect of her colleagues. But that morning, her carefully constructed life was about to come crashing down. Cold case detectives had spent months quietly building their case, knowing that her position in the department presented unique challenges. They had had to work with internal affairs to ensure the investigation remained under wraps, fearing that even a whisper of their suspicions could lead to evidence being destroyed or the case being compromised. When they were ready to make their move, they devised a plan to bring her in without arousing suspicion. Under the pretense of needing her input on a routine investigation, detectives asked Stephanie to meet them in the interview room at the station. She believed it was just another day on the job and agreed. What she didn't know was that the room had been carefully chosen. It was in an isolated area of the building, away from her colleagues and equipped with recording equipment. Detectives began the conversation casually, discussing unrelated work matters before steering the discussion towards Sherri Rasmussen. As soon as Sherri's name was mentioned, Stephanie's demeanor shifted. According to investigators, she became visibly tense and defensive, repeatedly claiming she didn't remember much about Sherri or her husband, whatever his name was. But as the questioning continued, her responses grew increasingly erratic. Detectives pressed her about her interactions with Sherri and the nature of her relationship with John, noting inconsistencies right away in her statements. At a certain point, Lazarus realized the conversation wasn't what it seemed. She asked, "Am I a suspect or something?" The detectives assured her they were just gathering information, but by then it was clear she was growing nervous. Once the interview ended, Stephanie was taken into custody. She was reportedly stunned as she was handcuffed and led away, her career and freedom slipping away in an instant. The news of her arrest sent shockwaves through the LAPD. Stephanie wasn't just any officer, she was one of their own, a decorated detective whose reputation was now irreparably tarnished. For her colleagues, the revelation was both shocking and deeply unsettling. Many struggled to reconcile the image of the competent, friendly officer they knew as the cold, calculated killer described by investigators. For Sherri's family, the arrest was a moment of vindication. After decades of being dismissed and ignored, Nels and Loretta finally saw their suspicions about Stephanie validated. "It's about time," Nels said in an interview.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is about time.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Way past time.
Way past time. He said, we've been saying her name for years.
For 23 years.
Mm-hmm. And he wished that it hadn't taken this long.
Absolutely.
Us too.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The sad thing is if she hadn't been a detective, she probably would have been investigated earlier.
Yep.
Or looked
Quickly.
into.
Absolutely. It's literally
Really
only
sad.
because of that.
Yeah.
Mhm. Eventually, we'll talk about some of these cases from LA in the late 70s and 80s, and you'll go, oh,
Mhm.
okay, par for the course. Great. Yeah. Not all of them, but there are some.
Blatant ones.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Nell's and Loretta's relief was tempered by the pain of reliving the loss of Sherri, as well as the anger of knowing the system had allowed her killer to evade justice for so long. Stephanie Lazarus was formally charged with the murder of Sherri Rasmussen, and her arrest marked the beginning of one of the most shocking criminal trials in LAPD history. For Sherri's family, it was a step towards closure, but the battle for justice still was far from over. The trial of Stephanie began in February 2012, nearly 26 years after Sherri's brutal murder. For Sherri's family, it was a long overdue moment of reckoning. For the public, it was a shocking case that combined betrayal, obsession, and an unsettling reality of a killer hiding in plain sight and a killer helping maintain law and protect the innocent.
Did they ever find out, because you said the neighbor heard what they thought was a female and a male arguing.
I was thinking about that.
I think it gave them the timeline, but I think it was Sherri and Stephanie.
Okay.
So I don't
Maybe
know.
she was just assuming that it was John or something, and so she wasn't
Maybe.
paying attention.
Isn't that weird though? That kind of
Yeah.
makes me wonder if someone was with her or
That's what I was kind of wondering too, but
John never said that they had an argument that morning. He said it was normal, business as usual. So
that's what I wondered, if someone had gone with Stephanie.
mhm.
I don't know.
I wonder that too, but it doesn't,
It
they
doesn't
never,
come out like that.
right. Yeah. Good question though. The prosecution's case painted a chilling picture of Stephanie as a woman consumed by jealousy and rage. Deputy District Attorney Shannon Presby described Stephanie as a scorned lover who couldn't accept that John, her former boyfriend, had moved on and kind of quickly married Sherri. The prosecutor argued that Stephanie, unable to let go, planned and carried out the murder in a fit of calculated vengeance. This was personal, she told the jury. This was a murder motivated by jealousy, fueled by obsession, and committed by someone who knew how to cover their tracks. The prosecution leaned heavily on the DNA evidence. The bite mark on Sherri's arm, which thankfully hadn't been destroyed and was preserved for decades, matched Stephanie's DNA, a discovery that tied her directly to the crime. They also introduced testimony from Sherri's family, who recounted the confrontations Sherri had with Stephanie before her death. Additionally, Stephanie's inconsistent statements during her 2009 interview were highlighted as further evidence of her guilt. The defense attorney, Mark Overland, countered with a different narrative. He argued the case against Stephanie was based purely on circumstantial evidence and unreliable memories because now it had been over 2 decades. Overland claimed the DNA evidence was mishandled and that the bite mark could have been left by someone else. He also questioned the LAPD's motives, suggesting that Stephanie had been made a scapegoat to deflect attention from the department's mishandling of the original investigation.
I'm kind of surprised that her DNA sat in the LAPD for that long and she
right?
didn't do anything about it.
I know. I was just thinking that.
I'm like,
Yeah.
unless she didn't know that they had collected that, but how would she
I
not?
guarantee she knew.
I'm sure she was like, well,
Once technology
it's in
started
there.
going further, I feel like you would
Yeah.
want to destroy it. Maybe. I don't know.
I mean,
Well,
you
yeah.
have the access.
that's what I was thinking. It was like, she knows that her DNA is sitting in there.
That's
Mhm.
it's
2
surprising that she
decades.
didn't try and do anything.
Yeah.
The only thing I can think of is she had moved to, art theft, and maybe she wasn't keeping up on the changes in DNA forensics. I don't know.
I don't know. That's kind of
It's
bizarre.
I mean, I know they were keeping the investigation under wraps, so maybe she just didn't even realize that they were
that they like
looking into it
reopened
again.
it.
yeah, no, she didn't know.
Yeah.
But why would you let it sit there for that long?
I mean, once it had been in there for 10 years,
Yeah.
15 years, 20 years. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah.
Yep.
I mean, they're
Maybe-
lucky.
Yeah, maybe since they didn't look into her the first time, maybe she just kind of thought she was in the clear and did not need to worry about ever being investigated in the future either.
Yeah, she could have thought that it would never be reopened and that maybe she'd be risking
Yeah.
something if anybody saw she was in evidence.
Where she's
or-
not supposed to be.
Yeah. If
That's
she's
not her
getting rid of
department.
evidence, then I mean that's very
very
guilty behavior.
telling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
That's interesting to me.
Yeah, me
Yes,
too.
Yeah.
Maybe I watched too many TV shows about cops.
I know. You watch, like, I know we bring Dexter up all the time. We'll move on. I know we will. But I mean, they
It's
got rid of
relevant.
evidence multiple times.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think it ever came out. Not that that's real life. I know. But
Yeah, it's not real, but it's always like, oh, they just go in there and can get rid of things.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And maybe it's not like that. I've never been in that area.
I think you do have to, from what I've seen, I don't know if it's true, like check out evidence and write that you're the one checking it out normally.
But if you went in there to like check out evidence for something else and
your
accessed
case.
But
that,
I think
Yeah.
I don't know how
people
that
are
all
in
works.
charge of
Getting
where
it for
the
you.
evidence. Yeah.
So,
And then I think the like officer checking out the evidence has to sign their name.
yeah. So maybe it's not like where you walk in and look at evidence
Yeah.
like on TV. I'm guessing
I'm-
that's not how it is.
I mean,
But it could have been in
It
86,
could have.
Exactly.
Oh, it definitely
87.
could have. Yeah.
90, 92.
90, yeah.
Mhm.
It could
Or
have
like
been
have
that
a
way.
buddy go and check it out for you and then destroy it. I don't know.
I don't know.
Something.
I'm just surprised it was still available
Yeah.
Yeah.
to be
And-
tested.
I mean, even that had been stored correctly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because if maybe something happened and it wasn't, it
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to either get DNA or be admissible in court.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Her defense lawyer said they needed someone to blame. Stephanie was an easy target.
Hmm.
I don't know why. It's
Maybe.
Why would
They
they
could have
just
argued that.
randomly target
Right.
her?
Yeah, they
Right.
could have said that maybe in 86,
mm-hmm.
not 20 years later after they have a DNA match with her.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
The defense pointed out the lack of physical evidence linking her to the murder scene beyond the DNA. There were no witnesses, no fingerprints, although there was the one, and I'm not entirely sure what happened with that one. The murder weapon, a 38 caliber revolver, had never been found. He urged the jury to consider the possibility that the real killer was still out there. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Both sides presented their arguments. For many, the DNA evidence was the smoking gun. That, coupled with her history of obsession with John and her confrontations with Sherri, the jury found it difficult to ignore the prosecution's case. On March 8th, 2012, after deliberating for just 2 days, the jury reached a verdict. Stephanie Lazarus was found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. She showed little emotion, but Stephanie's family, who was seated behind her, appeared devastated. Sherri's family felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. Nels later said, "This doesn't bring Sherri back, but at least we know the person responsible is finally being held accountable." In May 2012, Stephanie was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison with the possibility of parole. She is still incarcerated to this day. For Sherri's family, the verdict was a measure of justice, but the pain of losing Sherri was something they would carry forever. The trial was a landmark case, not just for the LAPD, but for the justice system as a whole. It exposed the flaws in the original investigation and raised questions about how law enforcement handles cases involving their own officers. For many, it was a reminder that no one is above the law, even if, justice is delayed for
Yeah.
26 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's so sad, but I mean, it's better late than never. You know?
Mhm. Yeah. During the trial, the jurors said after that they had been visibly affected by the graphic evidence presented. There were photos of the crime scene, details of Sherri's injuries, and it brought home the sheer brutality of the murder. Several jurors during the trial were seen wiping away tears as they listened to testimony from Sherri's family. Sherri's family recounted how bright, compassionate, smart she had been and how devastating the loss was for them. The DNA evidence, particularly the bite mark linking her to the crime, seemed to make a strong impression on many jurors. As one later said, the science doesn't lie. The jury did wrestle with the argument presented by the defense. He had raised questions about the reliability of the evidence. DNA was still new, relatively, in murder cases, and especially this kind of DNA evidence. Some jurors admitted later that they initially considered the possibility that Stephanie was just being used as a scapegoat, given the LAPD's clear mishandling of the case in the early stages. They said after, however, that they found the weight of the evidence against Stephanie too compelling to ignore. One juror described the deliberations as intense, but ultimately unanimous. We went through everything, every piece of evidence, every argument. We owed it to both the victim and the defendant to get it right, they said. Another juror noted that the bite mark DNA was the turning point for most of them.
Yeah.
There's no explaining away DNA.
Mm-hmm.
Science is real.
Yes.
Science is real.
Yes.
The jurors said it was clear that she had been at the scene and it just wasn't a burglary gone wrong. It was personal. The emotional impact of the trial wasn't lost on the jury. Many later said they were haunted by the details of the case and the realization that justice had been delayed for so long. What stuck with me most was Sherri's family, one juror admitted. To think they had to wait 26 years for answers, it's heartbreaking. We can't give them their daughter back, but we could at least give them some closure. Another juror reflected on how the trial changed their perspective on law enforcement, saying, "It's hard to believe that someone in her position could do something like this. It's a reminder that no one is above the law."
Yeah, that's definitely a good reminder.
Mm-hmm.
After the trial, several jurors spoke out about the toll it took on them personally. They said that it was emotionally exhausting. They knew the decision, whatever it was that they made, would change lives forever, both for Sherri's family and Stephanie and her family.
Mm-hmm.
Most expressed confidence that they had indeed reached the right verdict. It was hard, but justice was served. For Sherri's family, the decision by the jury was bittersweet. They thanked the jury for their diligence and compassion, acknowledging the difficulty of the case. It means everything to us that they saw the truth, Nels said. Sherri deserved this. The jury in turn expressed admiration for the family's strength and perseverance. One juror said they never gave up, and because of that, neither could we. One of the most glaring issues brought to light by the Lazarus case was the mishandling of the original investigation. Critics pointed to several failures, including the LAPD's early dismissal of Stephanie as a suspect, despite Sherri's family explicitly naming her and providing clear motive. Many viewed this as an example of quote-unquote blue wall culture, where law enforcement officers protect their own, even at the expense of justice. The LAPD's decision to pursue the burglary theory over more personal motives also came under heavy scrutiny. Commentators noted that focusing on an implausible narrative allowed Lazarus to escape suspicion for decades. Investigative journalist Matthew McGough, who wrote extensively about this case, argued the department's reluctance to investigate one of its own reflected deeper systemic flaws. This wasn't just about one officer's actions, he wrote. It was about an institution's unwillingness to confront uncomfortable truths. In response to public criticism, the LAPD conducted an internal review of its practices related to cold cases and officer accountability. Then Chief Charlie Beck acknowledged the department's failures in the Rasmussen case, stating, "We owe it to the victims and their families to ensure that no one is above the law." This case reminds us of the importance of thorough, unbiased investigations regardless of where the evidence leads. In November 2023, Lazarus was briefly granted parole. Here's the thing. California passed a law in 2020. It's Penal Code Section 3051. This established the framework for youth offender parole hearings, which provide individuals who committed their offense before the age of 26 an opportunity for earlier parole consideration.
So how old was she when this crime was committed?
25.
Ah.
This legislation acknowledges that young offenders may have diminished culpability due to factors like lack of maturity and an underdeveloped sense of responsibility.
At 25?
So at the time of the crime, she was 25.
Well, your prefrontal cortex doesn't fully develop until you're 25.
Yeah. It's interesting they picked 26 though, right?
Yeah.
I guess that is when you have to have your own insurance.
Yeah.
Right?
I guess that goes together.
You
I
can
guess,
finally rent
yeah.
a car.
And you have to be a grown up.
Yep, I guess
26.
so.
Your brain is fully developed.
I guess.
Yeah.
I had almost 2 kids by then.
Yeah. I did not.
Kids raising kids.
No.
Yeah, right.
Babies raising babies.
Mm. Because she was 25, she was eligible for the youth offender parole hearing under California law. In November 2023, during her initial parole suitability hearing, she admitted to the murder, expressed remorse for her actions, and ticked all the right boxes. The parole board panel recommended parole. It's been, 10 years? Citing her age at the time of the offense and her perfect behavior while incarcerated. However, this decision faced significant opposition from Sherri's family and the public, who highlighted the calculated nature of the crime and her subsequent actions to conceal her involvement. In response, Governor Gavin Newsom requested a full review of the parole grant. So she was told, "We think you'll get parole now." However, in the letter, Newsom said that while Stephanie had excellent disciplinary record as a prisoner and had sought to improve herself, she had evaded justice for more than 2 decades in the 1986 murder of Sherri Rasmussen, and she did not appear to begin taking full accountability for the murder until she was finally caught. The parole board met again. They reconsidered and eventually rescinded her parole on October 2nd, 2024, determining that the severity and circumstances of her offense outweighed factors favoring her release. This case underscores the complexities involved in applying youth offender parole provisions, especially when the crime involves premeditation and abuse of a position of trust.
Yeah.
The law aims to offer a second chance to those who committed offenses at a young age. Each case absolutely requires careful evaluation to balance, the rehabilitation prospects with justice for victims and public safety considerations.
Yeah.
For the LAPD, the Lazarus case absolutely left a lasting scar. Many within the department were relieved that justice was finally served. Others grappled with the damage to the department's reputation. How could this trusted officer, someone who had sworn to protect the public, be capable of such an awful crime? And how had the department failed so profoundly in holding her accountable for so long? The public's trust in law enforcement, already fragile due to high-profile scandals, took another hit. Activists pointed to the Lazarus case as proof of systemic issues in police accountability and called for widespread reform. While some progress was made, others argued that the changes did not go far enough. It's not just about one department, said a criminologist after the trial. It's about a culture that prioritizes loyalty over justice, and that's what needs to change. For many, this case became a cautionary tale. It served as a reminder that no system is perfect, and even those entrusted with upholding the law must be held to the highest standard. As Sherri's father, Nell, said, "We put our faith in the system let us down. But in the end, the truth came out, and that's what matters most." Sherri's family has worked tirelessly to ensure her memory is defined by her accomplishments and the love she brought to those around her. In the years since her death, they've spoken publicly about her life, emphasizing the need to remember her as more than just a victim of this crime. Her legacy is one of kindness, strength, and resilience. Nell said she was a person who always put others first, whether it was her patients, her colleagues, her family. Those are the things we want people to remember about Sherri. To honor Sherri's memory, her family has supported initiatives that promote victim advocacy and improve communication between law enforcement and families of crime victims. They have also worked to inspire young women in nursing, reflecting Sherri's dedication to the profession and her passion for helping others.
It's nice to hear, the families of these victims who, have advocated so heavily for change. It's nice to
Absolutely.
see, a difference from such a terrible circumstance that they are out there trying to make things better for other people.
Yeah, it's really inspiring. We hope that by telling Sherri's story, we've done our part to honor her and ensure that her story continues to inspire others. And we want to thank you for joining us on this journey. What do you guys think?
Really interesting. It's so hard, like knowing that they put that name out there at the time and nothing happened with it.
Yeah, and instead had to wait over 20 years to see any kind of closure. Or
It's so sad that they could have, I don't know, if they would have investigated her sooner, maybe.
And it wasn't even, please look and see if John had an ex-girlfriend, or it wasn't even, we think there's an ex-girlfriend that maybe is unhappy. Like it was, here are these things that happened. Here's the name.
This is why.
Here's where she works,
yeah,
This is
she's
why
shown up.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
is why we suspect her. This is who she is.
I
Yeah.
cannot.
It's not even
believe-
like in Christine's case where they had someone that they didn't investigate for a long time and it ended up not being who it was.
Right.
Like, they had it out there for so long and they didn't do anything about it.
And the reasons why they
Yeah.
suspected. Yeah.
And it was her.
And it was her. Yep.
Mhm.
And just like you
Sherri's
said,
family
screaming into the void for
Mhm.
years and years and years.
Sherri's family just every day has to be like, can we please,
Yeah.
just
Just
look into
look.
this.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I bet they wanted to write on the LAPD. We told you so.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm
Like-
curious if there's any DNA in her car
Maybe.
that they wouldn't have probably.
Well,
I don't
And
know.
she was, like,
maybe.
beaten too.
Mhm.
You would think that, like, if she was punching her, they would have seen something on her, or if she was hitting her with other things,
Skin cells under her
skin
fingernails.
cells,
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Mm.
I agree. It seems like a lot of evidence was not collected at all.
Yeah.
And you would think they would collect those things if they want to try to find who broke into her house, who the thief was.
Right.
What if they're going to do it again?
Yeah.
Right.
Next door neighbor. I
Yep.
mean, more people should have been pushing.
Well, I thought that too. I'm like, even if it was like a robbery or a burglary gone wrong, why are we still trying to find this person? They still killed her.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Like, they're like, oh, can't find it.
Well, you said it was labeled a cold case like within a week.
a couple weeks, but yeah, it was really fast.
So fast.
I mean, even, cases that we've covered from the early 70s are open for longer than this one.
Yeah.
It's
That almost makes me think that maybe they knew. Maybe someone knew and pushed for it to become a cold case
Yeah.
and
they
didn't
were
push
trying to
for.
cover for her because she's their
Yeah.
friend.
Mm-hmm.
Could be.
Not
Or,
cool.
I mean, maybe even they thought it would drag her name through the mud and they thought maybe it
Yeah.
couldn't possibly be her.
Yeah.
Yeah, that too.
Let's hope for that
So-
instead.
I know
Yes.
that's extremely optimistic and probably not what it was, but
No, that's. I'm
Mhm.
glad that they finally
Me
figured
too.
it out, but
Yeah, me
yeah.
too.
it's frustrating to see that they had the answer
Mhm.
and they
And it's
didn't
sad.
do anything
Mhm.
about it.
You've got so many that last for so long with no way to find the answer. And this one is sitting right there.
Yeah.
The whole time.
Mm-hmm.
So frustrating.
Yeah. And it wasn't just the one time they mentioned it. They're screaming it every day.
For years and years and years. I'm
Ugh.
glad that they finally got some new eyes in there and the
Yes.
technology that they could definitively match her to.
Yes.
I'm curious if someone retired around then or
Maybe.
something to where it finally landed on the cold case detective's desk.
Yeah, could be.
Well, what do you guys think? We love to hear your thoughts on these cases, your feedback, your theories, thoughts, questions. If you have any of those, send them our way, crimeclueless@gmail.com, or interact with us on social media. You can find Crime Clueless on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube. Just search for @CrimeClueless. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you want to read any of the resources that we use in this episode, head to our blog. You can find it linked on our website, crimeclueless.com, under the contributors section. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love if you take a minute to rate, review, or share our podcast. It really helps us out. It helps us reach more listeners and grow our community. You can find Crime Clueless on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, iHeart, and all major streaming platforms. As always, remember, we refuse to be clueless, careless, or caught off guard.
Not today, murderers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.